Everyone ridiculed his African ex at the royal event. Then she became the center of every eye. The envelope sat on her kitchen counter for 3 days. Adiz did not open it right away. She was not the kind of woman who rushed toward things that made her chest tight. She had learned a long time ago that stillness was not weakness. It was strategy. She had come home from a 12-hour flight from Nairobi, dropped her bag near the door and found it there, waiting. Cream-colored, heavy paper, the kind of envelope that announces itself before you even read the name on the front. Someone had slid it under her door while she was away. She made tea, she set the envelope on the counter, she went to bed. On the second day, she moved it to the dining table. She sat across from it and ate breakfast. The envelope did not flinch, neither did she. On the third morning, she opened it. It was a formal invitation to the Arden Charitable Foundation Gala, a black-tie event held annually at Whitmore Hall, a countryside estate in Oxfordshire, England. The charity raised money for international humanitarian projects. The event was known in certain circles, the kind of circles Adiz had spent years quietly moving through without making noise about it. The invitation had come through a mutual connection. A woman named Caroline, who sat on the foundation's advisory board and had met Adiz 2 years earlier at a summit in Geneva. Caroline had written a small handwritten note tucked inside. It said simply, "You should be in this room. I hope you'll come." Adiz read it once, then read it again. Then she saw the date, and her stomach did something she did not give it permission to do. Oliver Hale would be there. She knew this not because the invitation said so, but because Oliver Hale was always at events like this. His family had donated to the Arden Foundation for decades. His mother sat on the board. His name was probably already engraved somewhere in that estate, the way old English money engraves itself into stone before it has done anything worth remembering. Oliver, the man who had looked at her, across a restaurant table in London, and said the words she had never fully swallowed. "My family thinks we're moving too fast. They think we come from very different worlds." She had not cried then. She had cried later in the car, where no one could see it, and no one could make it mean something it did not. That had been 18 months ago. 18 months in which she had not slowed down once. She had finished the policy paper that 3 European think tanks had since cited in their own reports. She had led a field mission in the Rift Valley. She had spoken in Brussels, in Accra, in Singapore. She had eaten alone in hotel restaurants in 9 countries and learned to enjoy her own company in a way that felt less like loneliness and more like ownership. She had not thought about Oliver Hale every day, only some days, only when something reminded her of what it felt like to be told, gently and with apparent regret, that she was not quite the right fit for someone's life. She folded the invitation and placed it back in the envelope. She booked the flight that evening. She told no one. Not her younger sister Ngozi, who would have had opinions. Not her friend Bissy, who would have told her to wear something that made a statement. Not Caroline, who had sent the invitation and would have asked questions Adiz was not ready to answer. She simply booked the flight, arranged a car from the airport, and packed a single bag. One dress, black, long, structured at the shoulder the way her mother liked. She had worn it once before on a night in Lagos 8 months ago when she had finally stopped checking her phone for messages that were never going to come. She had gone out alone that night, to a quiet restaurant near the waterfront, and ordered the good wine, and realized, somewhere between the first glass and the second, that she was not waiting for anything anymore. She had worn the dress that night. It felt right to wear it again. The flight from Lagos to London was 7 hours. She slept for 4 of them. She spent the remaining 3 reviewing a briefing document from the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. There was a water rights meeting in 3 weeks. She needed to be prepared. She did not think about Oliver Hale at all during those 3 hours. She thought about water tables, about rainfall patterns in the Sahel. about a woman named Halima she had met in a displacement camp in northern Kenya, who had walked 6 hours to reach a water point that had run dry. The car picked her up at Heathrow at 6 in the morning. The English countryside rolled past the window, gray and green, and quietly beautiful in the way that England often is, not dramatic, not trying, just there, as though it has always known it will outlast whatever is looking at it. Whitmore Hall appeared at the end of a long private road lined with oak trees. Stone, tall windows, the kind of building that had watched several centuries pass without updating its opinion of itself. Adiz checked into the guest accommodation on the estate. The room was clean and high-ceilinged, and smelled faintly of old wood and fresh flowers. She unpacked her one bag carefully. She set her small bottle of shea butter on the bathroom counter. She hung the black dress on the back of the door. She stood at the window for a moment and looked out at the grounds below. Gardeners were setting up white-clothed tables on the lawn. A man was testing a microphone near a small outdoor stage. Women in aprons were carrying trays. The whole estate was preparing for something. So was she. She pulled out her briefing document and sat down at the small writing desk by the window and worked for 3 hours. She ate the lunch that was brought to her room. She answered 2 emails from colleagues in Geneva. She took a shower. She moisturized her skin slowly and carefully, the way her mother had taught her, as though the body deserved the same attention as everything else. She did her hair. It was natural and full, and she wore it exactly as it grew from her head, because she had stopped making apologies for it somewhere around the age of 24, and the decision had only ever cost her the opinions of people whose opinions she had not needed. She put on the black dress. She stood in front of the narrow mirror on the back of the bathroom door for exactly 4 seconds. Then she picked up her small evening bag, dropped her room key inside, and walked out. The gala was already full when she arrived. The main hall of Whitmore Hall had been transformed. Chandelier lights scattered across marble floors. A string quartet played near the far wall. Women in long gowns moved through the crowd like ships. Men in tailored suits stood in clusters, speaking in the lowered voices of people who are used to being listened to. Adiz walked in the way she always walked, not fast, not slow, the way her mother walked, as though the floor had been expecting her. A waiter appeared at her side and offered champagne. She took a glass. She stood for a moment near the entrance, not because she was uncertain, but because she was reading the room the way she always read rooms, noting the exits, noting the clusters, noting who was talking to whom and who was watching without talking. It took her less than a minute to feel the particular quality of the silence that followed her as she moved through the space. She had felt it before, in different rooms, in different countries, in different versions of the same gathering. It was not a loud silence. It was the kind that lives in the slight delay before someone meets your eye. The kind that lives in the way a group continues its conversation but shifts its angle just slightly, so that there is no room for a new voice to enter. The kind that lives in the server who offers the next tray to the woman beside her and keeps moving. She did not name it. She had stopped naming it because naming it gave it more space than it deserved. She moved through the room. She found a quiet corner near a long window that looked out onto the dark lawn. She sipped her champagne. She watched the bubbles rise from the bottom of the glass in a single neat line, urgent and orderly, and disappear at the surface. She thought, there is a metaphor in here somewhere. She would find it later. A woman in a silver gown drifted into her orbit. Mid-40s, bright eyes, the kind of smile that was practiced but not unkind. She looked at Adiz's necklace, a hand-beaded piece, red and gold, made by an artisan in Enugu, and said, "How fun. Did you get that on holiday somewhere?" Adiz said, "My aunt made it. She has been beading for 40 years. The woman nodded as though she had received an answer to a different question, and drifted away. A man in his 60s stopped to ask her, with wide, generous eyes, which part of Africa she was from. He said the word Africa the way people say ocean, as though the specifics of it were too large to bother with. She said Nigeria, Lagos specifically, though I grew up partly in Enugu. He nodded. He said, wonderful. He did not ask what was wonderful about it. He moved on. She drank her champagne. And then she saw Oliver Hale. He was across the room, near the fireplace, holding a glass of red wine with the particular ease of a man who has never had to think about whether he belonged somewhere. He was taller than she remembered. Or perhaps she had simply stopped making him taller in her memory, and now the real version was startling her. He was not alone. The woman beside him was fair-haired and slender, and wore a pale green dress that matched the room perfectly, as though she had been selected to go with the furnishings. Oliver saw her. She knew the exact moment because his body changed the way water changes when something falls into it, a small ripple, very fast, and then deliberate stillness. He came across the room. She had expected he would. He was the kind of man who believed that courage was crossing a room and never examined what courage was actually required for on the other side. Adiz, he stopped in front of her. He looked genuinely unsettled in a way that was almost flattering. I didn't know you were coming. She looked at him. He looked the same. That was the surprising thing about people who break your heart. They do not look like what they did. Oliver, she said. She smiled. Not for him. It was simply the face she wore when she had no interest in performing her feelings for an audience. He said something about how long it had been. She agreed that it had been. He said she looked well. She thanked him. There was a pause in which he seemed to be waiting for her to fill space, and she did not fill it because she had spent 18 months learning not to fill silences that did not belong to her. He went back to the woman in the green dress. Adiz turned back to the window. The lawn was completely dark now. The oak trees at the edge of the property were barely visible. Somewhere beyond them, the rest of the countryside continued on without knowing or caring what was happening inside this chandelier-lit room. She finished her champagne. A waiter appeared. She took another glass. Somewhere near the back of the room, she heard a woman say something in a low voice, and another woman laugh, the kind of laugh that comes from looking at someone. She did not look up. She had not come here to defend herself. Her mother had told her once, when she was 11 years old and had come home from school crying because a girl had said something about her skin. You do not explain rain to people who have never been thirsty. You do not explain yourself to rooms that have not earned you yet. She had been 11. She had not fully understood. She understood now. She stood at the window with her champagne and her Greytance necklace and her 18 months of rebuilding, and she let the room be exactly what it was. It would not be the same room by the end of the night. But that part was not yet. The main hall of Whitmore Hall was built for exactly this kind of evening. The ceilings were high enough to make voices carry without effort, and the chandeliers threw light down at angles that were flattering to everyone, which was probably intentional. Rooms like this had been built by people who understood that flattery, offered architecturally, cost nothing and secured everything. Adiz stood near the long window for a while, watching the room move the way rooms like this always moved, in clusters, in careful orbits. People gravitating toward familiar names and recognizable faces. The social physics of shared class and shared history pulling bodies together the way gravity pulls water downhill. She was not part of any of those orbits, not because she could not navigate them. She had been navigating rooms like this for years, in Geneva, in Brussels, in London conference centers where the carpet was expensive and the conversations were careful. She knew how to move through a room that had not made space for her. She had learned it at 22, in her first international policy internship, where she had walked into a meeting room in The Hague and watched 6 people look at her and then look past her as though she were a window rather than a person. She had learned, slowly and without anyone teaching her, that the answer was not to make yourself smaller so the room would be more comfortable. The answer was to be so precisely, quietly yourself that the room eventually had to decide what to do with you, and the decision was always theirs, not yours, and their discomfort with it was always theirs too. She moved from the window. She walked to one of the tall, round tables near the center of the room and set her champagne glass down. A couple nearby glanced at her. She gave them a polite nod. They returned it and turned back to their own conversation. The string quartet finished a piece and the room applauded lightly. Someone near the fireplace laughed very loudly at something, and several heads turned and then turned back. Adiz noticed, without particularly trying to, the small theater of the room. The woman in the silver gown who had asked about her necklace was now standing with two others, and once, only once, all three sets of eyes traveled briefly across the room to where Adiz stood, and then traveled away. It was the kind of glance designed to look like it hadn't happened. She had catalogued glances like that since she was old enough to understand what they meant. She was not angry about this one. Anger, at this particular temperature, was not worth the warmth. A man stopped beside her at the table. He was perhaps 70, silver-haired, with the unhurried manner of someone who had nothing left to prove and had decided to enjoy that freedom. He looked at her with genuine curiosity, rather than the performed variety. "First time at the Arden Gala?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "You?" He laughed. It was a real laugh. 19th, I think, or 20th. I stopped counting when I started losing track of which causes we were raising money for. He offered his hand. "Jeffrey." "Adiz," she said and shook it. He said her name back to her carefully, getting the syllables right. She appreciated that he tried. Most people did not try. They softened the vowels or swallowed the consonants or gave up entirely and said Ada, as though that were an acceptable abbreviation of a name that was not theirs to shorten. Jeffrey asked what brought her here. She told him she knew Caroline from the advisory board. He nodded. He knew Caroline well, had known her late husband even longer. He asked what Adiz did and she told him briefly. Water rights policy, humanitarian infrastructure, sub-Saharan focus mostly, though her work touched East Africa heavily. His eyes changed when she spoke, not in surprise exactly, more like the particular attention people pay when they realize they have stopped making conversation and started having one. He asked a specific question about the East African Water Accord, a question that assumed she knew what it was and had an opinion about it, which she did. They talked for several minutes. It was the best conversation she had yet in the room. Then someone pulled Jeffrey away, his name called from across the space, and he excused himself with genuine reluctance, which she filed away as a small, good thing. She was alone again. She did not mind it. She had long ago stopped treating solitude as a problem to be solved. But she noticed without surprise the way the room continued to calibrate its distance from her. Not hostile, nothing so dramatic. Simply the particular way that certain kinds of rooms maintain a perimeter around people they have not yet categorized. She was not fitting neatly into any of the available categories. She was not on staff. She was not attached to any of the men in the room in a visible way, not a wife, not a date. She was not old enough to be a patron. She was not British in any of the ways that British rooms tend to recognize immediately. She was something else. And rooms like this took time with something else. A young woman appeared at the edge of her vision, early 20s, bright-eyed, in a deep blue gown that was slightly too formal for her age in a way that was charming rather than awkward. She was holding a small notebook and a glass of sparkling water simultaneously, which told Adiz she was working the event rather than attending it. She came directly to Adiz with the forward energy of someone who had not yet learned to pretend. She was not curious. "Excuse me, are you Adiz Obi?" she asked. Adiz looked at her. "I am." The young woman's face broke into relief. I'm Fiona. I'm helping coordinate the program this evening. Caroline asked me to find you about 40 minutes ago, and I've been looking everywhere. She lowered her voice slightly, though it was not quite a whisper. There's been a change to tonight's program. The original keynote speaker, Dr. Harlow, he missed his flight from Edinburgh. We only found out 2 hours ago. She paused. Caroline said you already knew about the speaking slot. She said you agreed 3 weeks ago. Adiz said nothing for a moment. Fiona continued more carefully now. She said she cleared it with you, the 12-minute keynote after the welcome dinner. Yes, Adiz said simply, I know. Fiona exhaled the particular exhale of someone who has been holding a crisis in their body for the past 2 hours. Oh, thank goodness. I wasn't sure if Caroline is dealing with one of the trustees right now. She asked me to confirm you're still comfortable going ahead. I'm comfortable, Adiz said. Fiona nodded quickly. She said she would come back 15 minutes before the keynote to walk Adiz through the stage arrangement. Then she moved away into the crowd with the urgent purposefulness of someone who had 6 other things on her list. Adiz picked up her champagne glass and took a small sip. She had agreed to the speaking engagement 3 weeks ago, 2 days after the social invitation arrived. The Foundation's international director, a woman named Patricia who moved through humanitarian circles with the quiet authority of someone who had earned every room she'd ever entered, had called her directly. Patricia had heard her present at a conference in Nairobi. She had read the policy paper. She had asked, without preamble, whether Adiz would consider delivering the keynote at the Arden Gala. Given Dr. Harlow's declining health, a contingency had to be planned. Adiz had said yes because the cause mattered, and because Patricia had asked the right way, not as a favor, but as a recognition. She had not mentioned this to anyone, not to Ngozi, not to Bissy, not to Caroline, who had extended the social invitation separately and whose note had said, "You should be in this room." She was in the room, and the room did not yet know what for. She set down her champagne glass and turned back toward the window. Outside, the grounds were fully dark now. The oak trees had disappeared into the night. The only light was the warm overflow from the hall's tall windows, pooling on the lawn below in long yellow rectangles. Oliver Hale appeared at her side. She had not heard him approach. He had a new glass of wine and the particular posture of a man who has rehearsed what he is about to say. "I've been thinking," he said, "about whether to come over here." She turned to look at him, and I decided I should. He paused. "You look good, Adiz. You look really good." She understood, hearing this, that what he meant was slightly more than the words said. He meant, "You look like you are doing better than I imagined." He meant, "This is not what I expected when I pictured tonight." He meant several things that were not quite the words he had chosen. She was not unkind. She did not have the energy for unkindness, and it was not a tool she found useful. But she was also not warm in the way she would have been 18 months ago, when seeing him would have lit her like a power surge. "Thank you, Oliver," she said. He asked how she was. She said she was well. He asked about her work. She told him a small, accurate amount, the UN role, the recent field work. She watched his face as she spoke and saw the particular expression she had not been sure she would see. Something that was not quite regret, but was not comfortable either. A reckoning of arithmetic he had not expected to do this evening. "I've followed some of your work," he said. "The piece in The Economist. It was really impressive, Adiz." She thanked him again. He seemed to want her to say more. She did not say more. She had given him everything she had available, which was courtesy and nothing else, and she was not going to manufacture warmth because the room made him feel he deserved it. He touched his cufflink, a small, nervous gesture she recognized from a different life. He said it was good to see her. She said the same. He moved away. She watched him cross the room back to the woman in the pale green dress, who looked up at him with a question in her face. He said something. She said something back. He looked once more across the room in Adi's direction and then looked away. Adi's finished her champagne. The dinner bell rang, a low, resonant sound that moved through the hall like a current, and the crowd began to shift toward the long tables that had been arranged in the adjacent dining room. She found her place card. She was seated between Jeffrey, whom she had already met, and a woman named Harriet, who turned out to be a retired surgeon with an acerbic wit and an opinion about everything, and who was the most interesting person at the table by a distance. Dinner was served, courses came and went. The conversation around Adi's moved from charitable initiatives to property prices to a recent sailing trip someone had taken in Croatia, and she participated where the conversation was worth participating in, and listened where it was not, and let the evening pass at its own pace. Oliver was at a table across the room. She caught the position of him only once, when she turned to take a glass of water from a passing server. He was talking to someone, animated, his hands gesturing the way they always had when he was in a conversation he was enjoying. He was not looking at her. She turned back to Harriet, who was telling a story about a hospital administrator in Manchester that was deeply funny and only slightly appropriate. And Adi's laughed, a real laugh, the kind that surprised her, and Harriet grinned with the satisfaction of a woman who had always known her material was excellent. The plates were cleared. Coffee was brought. The room shifted into the looser, warmer energy that comes after a good meal when people remember they like each other. Fiona appeared at Adi's shoulder. 5 minutes, she said quietly. Adi set down her coffee cup. She wiped her mouth. She folded her napkin and placed it beside the saucer with the careful precision of someone who had learned that composure was a practice and not a state. She stood. Harriet looked up. "Oh, are you speaking this evening?" "Yes," Adi said. Harriet raised her coffee cup in a small, warm salute. Jeffrey, beside her, looked up and smiled, the smile of someone who had been waiting for this moment and had not known why until now. Adi's followed Fiona through the dining room toward the adjacent hall, where a small stage had been set with a podium and a single low light. Through the doorway, she could see the tables filling again as the guests carried their coffee and wined through for the program portion of the evening. She stood just off stage. The foundation's director, Patricia, was at the podium beginning the evening's formal remarks. She welcomed the guests. She thanked the sponsors. She spoke briefly and warmly about the foundation's work. Then she said, "Our keynote speaker this evening needs very little introduction, though I suspect many of you have already read her work without knowing it. She is a senior consultant with the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. She was the lead policy architect behind the East African Water Accord, signed in 2024 and cited by 4 international bodies as the most significant water rights framework in a generation. Her research has been used to direct over $300 million in humanitarian infrastructure funding. She is here tonight because she believes, as we do, that the work matters. Please welcome Adi's Obi." The applause started. Adi's walked out onto the stage. She walked the way she always walked, no rush, no performance. The way her mother had walked, as though the floor had always known she was coming and had been waiting patiently. She reached the podium. She set nothing on it because she had no notes. She looked out at the room. The room looked back at her. She saw Oliver Hale's face in the middle distance. His expression was the arithmetic she had predicted, not surprise exactly, because he was a smart man, and smart men rarely admitted to surprise. Something quieter, something he would have to sit with later, alone, and give a name to. She saw the woman in the silver gown, whose bright-eyed smile had landed on Adi's necklace and found it merely decorative. She was very still. She saw Jeffrey, near the back, who had already known there was something here worth paying attention to. She saw Fiona, standing just off the side of the room with her small notebook pressed to her chest. She took a single breath. And she began. She did not use notes, she never did. Adiz had learned, in her years of speaking in rooms that ranged from village meeting halls in Kenya to air-conditioned conference chambers in Geneva, that notes created distance. They put a page between the speaker and the people being spoken to, and the people on the other side always felt it, felt the speaker's eyes dropping away, felt the slight disconnection, felt themselves become an audience rather than a conversation. She did not want these people to be an audience. She wanted them to feel what she felt every time she walked into a displacement camp, or sat across from a government minister who had never been thirsty, or read a field report from a colleague who had driven 4 hours on a road that should not exist to reach a community that could not wait. She looked at the room. The room looked back. There was the brief, particular silence that comes at the beginning of something, when everyone is still making up their minds about what they are about to hear. She said, "The last time I collected water, I was 11 years old. My grandmother's house in Enugu had a borehole that ran dry every dry season, and when it ran dry, there were 2 options. You waited or you walked. My grandmother always walked. She said waiting taught you the wrong lessons." The room was very still. "I'm going to talk to you tonight about water. Not water as a resource, not water as a development goal, not water as a line item in a budget proposal, though I will get to all of those things. I want to start with water as a fact of the body. Water as the thing between staying alive and not staying alive. Water as what it actually is to the 371 million people in sub-Saharan Africa who do not have reliable access to it." She paused, not for drama, because what came next needed to land in space, not traffic. "I want to tell you about a woman named Halima." The room shifted, not visibly, the kind of shift that happens in the chest rather than the body, a collective leaning in. She told them about Halima. 43 years old, from a pastoral community in Turkana County in northern Kenya, mother of 4. Halima walked on average 6 hours a day to reach a water source. 6 hours, every day, not occasionally, not in crisis periods, every single day as a permanent feature of her life. Halima had been doing this since she was Halima's daughter's age, which is 9, Adiz said. The walk is approximately 22 kilometers round trip. She has done this walk, by her own estimate, more than 10,000 times. In those 10,000 walks, she has been the primary reason her children survived infancy. She has also never once been in a room like this one. She let that sit. The room let it sit with her. She moved through the speech the way she always moved through it, not building toward a single climax, but building toward a series of recognitions, each one arriving before the listener expected it, each one a small opening in the floor of the room's assumptions. She talked about the East African Water Accord. She explained it plainly, not in the policy language of briefing documents, but in the language of what it meant on the ground. She described what had changed in the 18 months since the accord was signed. The 73 water points constructed in the Rift Valley. The 11,000 households with access to clean water who had not had it 2 years ago. The reduction in waterborne illness in targeted communities. The girls who were now in school, because they were no longer spending their mornings on water walks. Infrastructure is not abstract, she said. It is the most concrete thing there is. A pipe is a pipe. A pump is a pump. A decision made in a building like this one, in a room like this one, about where money goes and what it builds, that decision has a physical form. It lands somewhere. It becomes something. Or it doesn't, and the absence is also physical. The absence is also a fact of the body. She was not performing passion. She was not raising her voice or leaning into the microphone for emphasis. She spoke the way her work moved, not dramatically, but with the certainty of something that had already happened and could not be undone. She talked about a pipeline decision made in a Brussels office in 2019, A rerouting that had seemed in that room to be a logistical efficiency, a shorter route, a cost reduction. The new route bypassed 3 communities in southern Ethiopia that the original route would have served. The decision was made without field consultation. The people who made it had never been to those communities. They had looked at a map. One of those communities lost access to its previous water infrastructure when construction disrupted the existing system, she said. The new pipeline never came. The disrupted system was never restored. 14 months after that decision was made in that Brussels office, that community's water access had declined by 60%. She did not raise her voice on this. 60% in 14 months, because someone looked at a map. The room was completely quiet, not the polite quiet of an audience managing its attention, the quiet of people who were genuinely inside something. She talked about solutions. She was always careful to talk about solutions, because rooms like this one could tip into guilt very easily, and guilt was not useful to her. Guilt made people feel that the problem was about them. The problem was not about them. The problem was about pipes and pumps and policy frameworks and the very simple, very difficult act of making decisions that accounted for the people those decisions would land on. She talked about the Arden Foundation's existing work in the region and where the current funding gaps sat. She was specific. She named projects. She named the communities they served. She named the amounts that were needed and what those amounts would build concretely in the ground. A borehole in northern Uganda costs approximately £15,000 to drill and install with a hand pump. It serves approximately 300 people. It lasts, with basic maintenance, 20 years. She paused. That is £50 per person, across 20 years, for water. She looked at the room. I am not telling you what to do with that information. I'm just making sure you have it. She had been speaking for 11 minutes. She knew this without looking at a clock because she always knew where she was in a speech the way a musician knows where they are in a piece, not by counting, but by feel. She came to the end the way she always came to the end, without announcing it. My grandmother walked because she said waiting taught you the wrong lessons. I have spent my career trying to build a world where the walking is optional, where the choice exists, where a woman like Halima, or a girl like the girl my grandmother's granddaughter used to be, has the morning free for something other than the fact of survival. She looked at the room one more time. That is the work. Thank you for being part of it. She stepped back from the podium. The applause started slowly. The particular slow start that happens when people are still processing, when the room has to shake itself loose from where the words took it before it can remember how to respond. And then it built quickly into something full and genuine, the kind of applause that has weight in it. She walked off the stage. Fiona was there waiting. Her eyes were bright. That was extraordinary, she said. Adiz thanked her. She took a glass of water from a nearby tray and drank half of it. Through the doorway, she could hear the applause continuing. Then Patricia's voice returning to the microphone, warm and composed, saying what she needed to say. Adiz stood in the small corridor just off the hall. The stone walls were cool. The noise from the room was muffled but present. She was aware, in the particular way that she always was after a speech, of a kind of quiet that settled over her, not emptiness, but completion. The thing had been said. It was out in the room now, doing whatever it would do. She had no more control over it than she had over water finding its own level. She walked back into the room. The room she walked back into was not the room she had walked out of. That was the only way to describe it, and she knew it was true before she had taken 3 steps through the doorway. It was the same marble floor, the same chandeliers, the same gathered guests, but the quality of the air had changed the way air changes after a storm, not calmer exactly, but cleaner, as though something had passed through and taken a layer of accumulated pressure with it. She was aware, immediately, of the difference in how the room moved toward her. Before the speech, people had looked past her, through her, or at her with the particular sideways attention of people categorizing an unknown. Now the attention was direct, unambiguous, the kind that says, "I see you now, and what I see is not what I thought was here." She did not let it change how she moved. She moved the same way she always moved. Jeffrey was one of the first to reach her. He extended his hand again, and this time the handshake was different in a way neither of them named. "That was quite something," he said. "I've been coming to this gala for 2 decades, and I have not heard a speech like that in 2 decades. She thanked him genuinely. He was not a man who said things for the sake of saying them. A woman appeared beside him almost immediately, late 50s, elegantly dressed, with the kind of quiet authority that did not announce itself. She introduced herself as Lady Wyndham. She sat on the board of 2 charitable trusts, one of which had been looking for an advisory voice on East African infrastructure for some time, and she wondered whether Adiz had any time in her schedule for a conversation. "Not tonight," she said. She understood this was not the place. But she handed Adiz a card, and the card was the real kind. The kind with only a name and a phone number, because people at a certain level do not need to list their credentials, because everyone in their circles already knows them. Adiz took the card. She said she would be in touch. The woman in the silver gown appeared in her peripheral vision at some point in the next 20 minutes. She did not approach. She stood at a moderate distance, part of a group, and once, only once, her eyes met Adiz across the room. The expression in them was not what it had been earlier. It was something more complicated, something that had the shape of recalibration. Adiz did not press it. She was not interested in collecting those moments. A man named Alistair, a property developer who had been at the gala with his wife and who seemed to know everyone in the room, came to speak with her with the genuine, direct enthusiasm of someone who had been moved by something and did not know how to be subtle about it. He said the part about the Brussels pipeline decision had made him think about a decision he'd been part of in a different context, not in development work, but in construction in Southeast Asia years ago. He said he was not sure his decision had been better than the one she described. He said this with the unusual honesty of a man briefly freed from the performance of confidence. She listened to him, properly. She responded with questions rather than reassurances, because his discomfort was the beginning of something potentially useful, and she did not want to smooth it away. Fiona came back at some point, slightly breathless, with a journalist from a philanthropic sector publication who had been in the room for the evening and wanted to request a proper interview at a future date. Adiz said yes. She took the journalist's card. She found herself in the middle of the room, talking, and the talking was real, not the polite performance of social conversation, but the kind that builds on itself, that goes somewhere, that makes people pull out their phones to write down a name or a figure she mentioned. She was not different. She was exactly who she had been when she walked in through the front entrance 3 hours earlier, in her black dress, with her aunt's necklace and her one packed bag and her briefing documents and her 18 months of quiet, careful reconstruction. The room was different. She had not needed to make it different. She had simply needed to let it hear her. Caroline found her near 11 o'clock. Caroline was a compact, efficient woman in her early 50s who moved through events with the practiced ease of someone who had organized 100 of them. She reached Adiz and held both her hands in hers for a moment. "I'm so glad you came," Caroline said. "So am I," Adiz said. And she meant it, though not in the way Caroline perhaps assumed. She meant it for reasons that were not about the room or the applause or the business cards accumulating in her small evening bag. She meant it because she had come here with something to give, and she had given it. And the giving was its own thing, separate from whatever the room did with it afterward. Oliver Hale found her near the end of the evening. She had known he would. She had known it with the particular certainty of knowing how a specific kind of story ends. not because she was bitter or because she had planned anything, but simply because she understood, after 18 months and a career's worth of reading rooms, what this kind of room required. It required a reckoning. And Oliver was the kind of man who understood on some level when a reckoning was his to walk toward. He came to where she was standing near the window, the same window where she had stood at the beginning of the evening, watching champagne bubbles disappear. He had his jacket on now. It was late. People were beginning to drift toward the exits. He said, "I had no idea, Adiz." She looked at him. He meant the speech, the credentials, the UN role, the accord, all of it. He meant, "I had no idea this was the shape of what I walked away from." She said, "You never asked." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the window. The lawn was dark outside. The oak trees were invisible. The estate had gone on and on in the dark, existing without needing anyone's permission. He said, "I should have." She looked at him with something that was neither warm nor cold. It was simply clear. The look of someone who has resolved something inside themselves that the other person does not yet know has already been resolved. "Probably," she said. "Good night, Oliver." She turned. She collected her small bag from the chair where she had left it. She said good night to Jeffrey and to Harriet, who was finishing the last of the wine with the satisfaction of a woman who had decided long ago that life was too short for bad choices, but long enough for good wine. She said good night to Fiona, who looked at her with the uncomplicated admiration of someone young enough not to hide it yet. She walked through the main hall of Whitmore Hall, across the marble floor, under the chandeliers that had watched the whole evening without comment, and out through the front entrance. The night air outside was cold. The English countryside was dark and quiet and smelled like rain that had not yet decided to fall. The car she had booked was waiting at the bottom of the stone steps. The driver got out when he saw her and opened the door. She sat in the back seat. The door closed. The car moved down the long private road, through the avenue of oak trees that were still invisible in the dark, but that she knew were there, enormous and unhurried and rooted in something that did not need anyone's acknowledgement to continue existing. She took out her phone. She opened a message to her mother in Lagos. She wrote in Igbo, 4 words. She set the phone on the seat beside her and looked out at the dark road. Her mother's reply came in less than a minute. It was 2 words. She looked at them for a long moment. Then she put the phone away, leaned her head back against the seat, and closed her eyes. The car moved through the English countryside in the dark, carrying her back toward the lights of the city, and she felt not triumph, not vindication, not the particular sweetness of having been proven right. She felt something quieter than all of those things. She felt like herself, entirely and without apology. That had always been the destination, not the room, not the applause, not the look on Oliver Hale's face when the arithmetic finally added up. Just herself. Still here, still whole, still moving. She had never needed the room to know her worth, but tonight the room had learned it anyway. And that, she thought, closing her eyes in the warm dark of the moving car, was simply how it went when you refused to be anything other than what you were. Her gray-tance necklace rested warm at her throat, red and gold, 40 years of craft against her skin, and the English countryside rolled past, unknowing, indifferent and beautiful. The room was behind her. Everything ahead was still hers.